The deep state has been obsessed with murdering babies for generations, and they've controlled the Supreme Court for generations. Now, this leaked opinion on Roe versus Wade suggests something may be breaking, but make no mistake, they are going nowhere. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, Alex Newman here with Behind the Deep State. Thank you so much for tuning in. And at this point, unless you're living under a rock, you've heard that Politico leaked a draft opinion of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade. Pretty interesting document written by Judge Samuel Alito, one of maybe two that seem even halfway decent. And he wrote in this draft that Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. And duh, I mean, that's like saying the sky is blue, right? Not really great revelations there. But folks, I want to go through some of what this means. First of all, I want to show you this little video of a baby. About 20 weeks old, this child. And at this age, children all across the United States are being slaughtered every single day in large numbers. Now, you tell me whether you think this is a lump of cells or a baby. All right, folks. So just so we're clear, that is a baby. That is a human being. It is a human being from the moment of conception when it has a full set of human DNA. What else is it? Is it a frog? Is it a leprechaun? No, it's a human being, right? This is not even an issue that, in my opinion, is even up for discussion. It's so obvious that it's a human that these people have to twist themselves into pretzels to argue in favor of murdering these innocent human beings, the most innocent human beings, the most vulnerable, the most helpless human beings. Very much like the Nazis, they dehumanize their victims. Oh, they're not really humans. They're subhuman. They're lumps of cells. They're like cancer, right? It's a parasite is what we hear. Exactly the same kind of disgusting rhetoric we heard from slave traffickers, from Nazis, from concentration camp guards. It's disgusting. Dehumanizing the victims that you intend to murder is disgusting, but it's par for the course for the deep state. Now, there are growing calls to fire any justice who may have been involved in this unprecedented leak from the Supreme Court. Sotomayor, we're looking at you, you left-wing deep state toady. Yeah, we're looking at you and your four law clerks. But, we've narrowed down the list of suspects. It's probably a dozen people ought to be looked at very, very, very closely. But I want to get into some of the bigger picture things here, folks. The deep state has had an obsession with murdering babies and reducing the population and eugenics for at least a century that we know of. I mean, some of this goes back to Malthus, but over the last 100 years, some of the key deep state families, think Rockefeller dynasty, think Adolf Hitler and his backers. Think Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Think Julian Huxley, the first head of UNESCO, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, who also just so happened to be the head of the Eugenics Society. These people have had it in their minds that there are some people that are better than other people. And they might have differed slightly on which people were better than other people, but they all agreed that we should manipulate the human genome by using forced sterilization, abortion, contraceptions, and all kinds of other tools to promote the birth of the right kind of people and stop the wrong kind of people from being born. So with that in mind, it's very clear that the deep state is now drumming up all kinds of fanaticism to try to perpetuate the murder of babies. In fact, we're getting reports that law enforcement all across the country is now preparing for the very real possibility of violence and civil unrest. And I don't mean violence against unborn babies. That has been going on, and law enforcement doesn't seem to be doing very much about it, but violence against post-born people. And they're now talking about massive civil unrest. There are intelligence bulletins going out to law enforcement agencies across the country, warning of potential threats. And it's a very real possibility that we may see cities go up in flames if the baby butchers are told that they're not allowed to murder babies in certain jurisdictions, right? To be clear, the overturning of Roe versus Wade doesn't actually end the mass murder of babies in America. There are crazy states right now like California and Colorado that are considering legalizing the murder of the baby all the way up until the moment of birth or even after birth, right? There's a bill that would let you kill your baby after it was born. And I think this is useful actually in a way because now the mask is dropping, right? They used to say, oh, we're not murdering babies. That's just a lump of cells. Now they're saying, well, yeah, it's a baby. Yeah, we're murdering it. But who are you to tell us not to murder that baby, right? What's the big deal? It's just a baby, right? And so now the Democrats, the deep state Democrats are losing their minds over this. They're trying to abort the filibuster to try to preserve the mass murder of babies across America. Former Democratic presidential candidate, what's his name? Bernie Sanders, the Marxist revolutionary who went on his honeymoon to the Soviet Union. Yeah, what a weirdo. Less than an hour after the news broke, he tweeted this out. He says, Congress must pass legislation that codifies Roe versus Wade as the law of the land in this country now, all caps for emphasis. And if there aren't 60 votes in the Senate to do it, and there are not, then we must end the filibuster to pass it with 50 votes. Okay, folks, there you go, right? Black Lives Matter activist, burn, loot, and murder activist, Missouri Rep. Cori Bush has also said something similar. Abolish the filibuster, codify Roe, expand the Supreme Court, protect abortion rights. They mean the right to murder your baby, which of course there is no such right, by any means necessary. This is an emergency, they say, okay? That's what they're doing, folks. That is what they're doing. Many others, including Representative Ilhan Omar, the refugee who came here from Somalia and now wants to make America Somalia. Yeah, that'll be fun. They're all advocating for this. What's her name? Tlaib. And it's interesting because, Muslims aren't normally in favor of murdering babies, but these two Muslim women in the Congress, they seem conflicted between their support for murdering babies and their support for their religion, which says you shouldn't murder babies. But looks like their deep state connections and the Democrat Party won out there. Now, to give you a sense of how unhinged these people are becoming about the inability to murder babies in certain states, right? To be clear, again, there's only a handful of states right now that would automatically ban the murder of unborn babies, but they're losing their minds over this. Look, here is Joe Biden, the resident of the White House, saying that these people are the most extreme political in history. Watch this.
What are the next things that are going to be attacked? Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history.
All right, folks, Trump supporters, you are the most extreme political organization in history. Not the Ku Klux Klan, not the Communist Party USA, right? A tentacle of one of the most murderous regimes in all of human history. Not them. Nope, it's MAGA. It's Trump supporters. Now, the Supreme Court of the United States has been an instrument, a critical instrument of the deep state for advancing the deep state's agenda for a very, very long time in this country. And that's no surprise. There have been numerous deep state toadies serving on the Supreme Court for at least 100 years, if not more. How about Stephen Breyer, U.S. Supreme Court Justice, also a member of the deep state headquarters in the United States, the Council on Foreign Relations. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, another U.S. Supreme Court Justice until 2020, also a member of the deep state swamp known as the Council on Foreign Relations. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, also a member of the U.S. Supreme Court and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. Skull and Bones, the disgusting secret society with their weird little rituals where George Bush and John Kerry were both members. They've had numerous members on the Supreme Court. Morrison Remick Waite, he was the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. William Howard Taft, another Chief Justice of the United States. Potter Stewart, another U.S. Supreme Court Justice. All of these men were members of the very creepy Skull and Bones Society. And so what we've seen, folks, develop in this country is exactly what Thomas Jefferson warned about. Okay, Thomas Jefferson, in a letter that he wrote to William Jarvis, wrote this. You seem to consider the judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions, a very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. He says our judges have with others the same passions for party, for power, and for privilege of their core. Their power is the more dangerous as they are in office for life and not responsible, as the other functionaries are, to the elective control. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal. It has more wisely made all the departments co-equal and co-sovereign within themselves. In other words, Thomas Jefferson was warning that if we accepted this crazy idea that the Supreme Court was the final arbiter on everything, we would be living under, as he said, the despotism of an oligarchy. And folks, that is where we are today. And this oligarchy doesn't even really bother pretending anymore, right? If you go read Roe versus Wade, it's the most asinine legal argument that you could ever imagine. I mean, a second grader could do a better legal analysis than this clown car known as the Supreme Court. They found in the penumbras of the Constitution some imaginary right to privacy, which somehow having privacy means you get to kill your baby. Yeah. That is the intellectual reasoning of a kindergartner who still eats boogers and crayons, not a legitimate judicial institution. And yet somehow Americans were duped into believing, after generations of brainwashing in the government school, that if the Supreme Court has an opinion, suddenly that's the law of the land. Well, if you go back and read your Constitution, you'll see that only Congress makes the laws. In fact, all legislative powers are reserved to the Congress. If all are reserved to the Congress, How many does that reserve to the Supreme Court? Math isn't my forte, but I'm pretty sure it's 0. Okay. So, folks, the Supreme Court doesn't get to write the law of the land, regardless of what Joe Biden and the other deep state toadies believe. And folks, Roe versus Wade was just one of many abominable, horrific, insane deep state decisions in this country that should never have been recognized, that should never have been accepted, that should have been resisted from the moment they were passed by every state in the union and also by Congress. Here's some other ones. Reynolds versus Sims in 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that states don't get to decide how their legislative bodies are going to be constituted anymore. You need to completely change your state Senate if it doesn't include exactly what we think it should include. Back then, a lot of states had Senate representation for each county in the state. And the Supreme Court said, well, that's not fair. We think that you need to draw different Senate maps so that every Senate district has exactly the same number of people, more or less, instead of just allowing states to organize their affairs the way they want. In 2015, the clown car that is the Supreme Court decided that, hey, somehow you all have a right to a homosexual marriage. Never mind the fact that a marriage is not a right, it's a responsibility. It's a holy union instituted and ordained by God for the purpose of rearing children, for the purpose of glorifying God. Never mind all that. Never mind that even the fruits and nuts in California voted against creating a so-called homosexual marriage, which is practically an oxymoron. Never mind all that. The clowns on the Supreme Court decreed it, and so for some insane reason that I will never understand, states said, oh, okay, well, if the Supreme Court has an opinion, I guess we'll just throw out our Constitution that 85% of people voted for, and we'll just do whatever these clowns in black robes say. Folks, this is so ridiculous, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why the Supreme Court finally backed down on Roe versus Wade. They realized people were getting very impatient with this. States all across this union were passing laws that that nullify this insane decision, that specifically say it doesn't matter what the federal courts say, nobody is going to murder babies in the state. If they do, they're going to be prosecuted and they're going to be put in prison. The Supreme Court realized that their authority was being challenged like never before because people weren't just going to continue tolerating the slaughter of unborn children. Now, obviously, there are other remedies for stopping the clowns on the Supreme Court. It doesn't just have to be state nullification. In fact, for decades, Congressman Ron Paul and others introduced very, very simple legislation that would have stopped the Supreme Court. And you have all these pro-lifers whine, oh, we can't do anything because of Roe versus Wade. It's the law of the land. Oh, my goodness. Give me a break, right? If all these whiny pro-lifers in Congress had actually done something useful, they could have passed a very, very simple law that would have immediately stopped Roe versus Wade and would have halted the killing all across the land. Under the 10th Amendment, of course, all powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states, and that includes the power to punish murder, right? In fact, the obligation to punish murder. And so the Supreme Court really has no jurisdiction there. And so Congressman Ron Paul regularly introduced, and so did others, a bill called the We the People Act. He introduced it in every term going from like 2004 up until, I think, 2012. And other representatives got involved as well. You know, I don't want to criticize all of them. But what this legislation said is that the federal courts have no jurisdiction over state laws involving religious freedom, privacy, sexual orientation, or abortion. It would also punish any judge that violates these established limits by literally removing them from office, right? Congress has all kinds of power to rein in the courts. They have the power to define the jurisdiction of the courts, except those that are specifically mentioned in the Constitution. They have the power to create courts and abolish courts, other than the U.S. Supreme Court. They have the power to remove judges. Right? And if a clown pretending to be a judge says, hey, you get to murder babies because we found it in the penumbras of the Constitution, the correct response from the Congress should have been, okay, clowns don't get to serve on the Supreme Court. We need people who at least understand the basics of the Constitution, who can at least read words. And you know, that would have been a very simple solution. So Congressman Ron Paul at the time said, it's long past time that Congress exercises its authority to protect the Republican government of the states from out-of-control federal judges. The only way to resolve controversial social issues like abortion and school prayer is to restore respect for the right of the state and local governments to adopt policies that reflect the beliefs of those citizens of those jurisdictions. Now, that would have been a very, very simple solution. It would have been a constitutional solution to stopping this outrageous usurpation of power by the Supreme Court. And instead, all the whiny pro-lifers in Congress just said, oh, law of the land, sorry, can't do anything. Maybe elect more Republicans and maybe we'll try to get another Republican justice on the Supreme Court, right? What a joke, folks. Same thing for homosexual marriage, right? The federal government has no power to deal with marriage. And Ron Paul actually pointed this out when he introduced this bill. He said Congress must launch a preemptive strike against any further federal usurpation of the state's authority to regulate marriage by removing issues concerning the definition of marriage from the jurisdiction of federal courts. I would remind my colleagues and the federal judiciary that under our constitutional system, there is no reason why the people of New York and the people of Texas should have the same policies regarding issues such as marriage and school prayer. Obviously, despite all that, the bill went nowhere because most of the whiny congressmen who claim to be pro-life are not actually interested in protecting babies. They just want to make sure that naive conservatives continue to be duped into voting for them. So, folks, that's what we really need to focus on. Now, again, I mentioned that the tide was really turning. People were having enough of this pretend idea that the Supreme Court is God and that the Supreme Court gets to overturn God and the Constitution and whatever it wants. And in fact, just very recently, we covered at the New American, the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, the largest denomination of Christians after the Roman Catholic Church in the United States, passed an incredible resolution. And I won't read you the whole thing, but some very significant things. They passed this in 2021, last year, June 15th and June 16th. They stated, and I'm quoting here, we do state unequivocally that abortion is murder, and we reject any position that allows for exceptions to the legal protection of our preborn neighbors, compromises God's holy standard of justice, or promotes any God-hating partiality. They said we will not embrace an incremental approach to ending abortion because it challenges God's lordship over the heart and conscience and rejects his call to repent of sin completely and immediately. They went on to say that the murder of the preborn is a crime against humanity. It must be punished equally under the law. Resolved that we humbly confess and lament any complicity in recognizing exceptions that legitimize or regulate abortion, and of any apathy in not laboring with the power and influence we have to abolish abortion. They went on to say that as Southern Baptists, we will engage with God's help in establishing equal justice and protection for the preborn according to the authority of God's word, as well as local and federal law, and call upon pastors and leaders to use their God-given gifts of preaching, teaching, and leading with one unified, principled, prophetic voice to abolish abortion. And finally, they said, be it resolved that because abolishing abortion is a Great Commission issue, we must call upon governing authorities at all levels to repent and obey everything that Christ has commanded, exhorting them to bear fruit in keeping with repentance by faithfully executing their responsibilities as God's servants of justice and working with all urgency to enact legislation using the full weight of their office to interpose on behalf of the preborn, abolishing abortion immediately without exception or compromise. And that is what many, many states were doing. Alabama, just a couple years ago, passed the Human Life Protection Act that bans all abortions except in the case of saving the mother's life, which, of course, is basically never even an issue. Other states have passed similar bills. Oklahoma, the state of Florida now has passed bills to limit abortion. States all over the union were finally starting to realize that, hey, we don't have to accept this idea that we're just going to tolerate our preborn neighbors being slaughtered in large numbers because some deep state toadies on a joke of a court decided that that was their opinion. And it's time for a renewed understanding of the Supreme Court, folks, a renewed understanding of its actual power. Go to the Constitution and just read it, right? Article 3 establishes the courts. Go read the power of the courts. Go read the powers of the federal government in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Recognize that they do not have power to legalize the murder of unborn babies. In fact, the obligation of the government is to protect the rights of all citizens. And you could even make an argument that under the 14th Amendment, the federal government has an obligation to protect the right to life of children if a rogue state run by lunatics like California or Colorado decides to facilitate the murder of unborn babies. So we need a totally different understanding of government, folks. The purpose of government is to punish evil and to protect rights, as our founding fathers understood. And if and when the federal government goes beyond what it can do, it's time for our state governments to nullify these evil, horrible, lawless, and unconstitutional decrees. We did a whole episode on nullification, folks. I hope you'll go check it out for this show, Behind the Deep State. These are some of the most critical issues of our time, folks. And if we work in a concerted way at our state level and at our local level, we can turn the tide. We can stop a lot of this evil. And eventually, we can stop the mass murder of unborn babies, not just in conservative states, but everywhere. We're all out of time, but I want to thank you for tuning in, folks. I'm Alex Newman. This is Behind the Deep State. Go to thenewamerican.com. Subscribe to our print magazine. Get signed up. Subscribe to all of our video platforms. You can find us on Rumble or Brighteon or all these different great alternative platforms that, unlike the fascists at YouTube, don't try to control what we can say and what you can hear. Also, if you want to support us, you can do that at thenewamerican.com. Thanks again for tuning in, folks. Until next time, God bless you all.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe, hit like, hit that little bell so that you'll be notified whenever we post new videos. And also, please make sure to share this video with your friends. Email's a great way to do it. Remember, there are powerful forces working to steal our freedom and destroy our country. We need to work together, expose those behind the deep state. Otherwise, you can kiss your liberties goodbye.